Hey everyone, this is Jack from Galaxy Grudge, and today we're going to be making something incredibly exciting, rocks. So after we released our latest devlog, a number of you reached out to me with some questions about the environment work we've been doing in our game. So today we're going to go through some ways to create entirely procedural and tileable rock textures in Designer. Since this channel is all about community involvement, I figured this would be a great chance to share some tips and tricks with everyone in the format of a simple tutorial. Let's jump in. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to go up to File, New, and we're going to create a new substance graph. I'm going to call this Rocks, and the template I'm using is Metallic Roughness, and the size I'm using is 4K, and then I'm just going to hit OK. So once that's done, that will create all of your material outputs here. I have my UI set up so that my 2D view is here, my 3D view is here. I'm rotating around using Alt left click, and you can use Control Shift right click to rotate the HDRI lighting around the model. So usually one of the first things I like to do is grab my normals and my ambient occlusion and my height data and group those together, and then I'll take the color, the metallic, and the roughness and drop it up here out of the way. And one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to create an auto levels node here, and I'm going to plug this into my normal, my height, get rid of this guy, get rid of the ambient occlusion, color, and after my auto levels I'm going to make an HBAO ambient occlusion node and plug that in. And this is usually the end of my node chain when I'm starting something from scratch, because I get all the details and the occlusion and the height together. So what we'll do is, just to start with, we'll do a simple node. We'll grab a tile sampler and we'll plug this straight into our auto levels just so we have something to look at. If you double click the sampler, it'll appear in your 2D view here. And I'm going to scroll down in the parameters here, and I'm going to change this pattern to pyramid, which is this sort of 2D pattern here. And I'm going to decrease the amount of these down to something like maybe 7 in X and Y. So we don't have too many shapes. We're starting with the large structure of the rocks first. And we need to create some variation to this. So in the parameters, I'm going to add scale to all of these. I'm going to add some scale random so that some of them are bigger and smaller than the others. And I'm going to do position random as well. Not a huge amount of this, I don't think. We just need a little bit. And I'm also going to go rotation random also. And you can see that now that we've randomized these, we've got quite a few sort of gaps popping up here. This is actually okay because we do want some gaps in this rock structure. So what I might do is play with the random position until I get a pattern that I'm happy with. And there's probably a little bit too much gap here. So what I might do is come back to the scale and just push the scale up quite a bit. And let's reduce some of that random position somewhat. And I might also reduce some of the scale random just so that the structure of these bumps is a little bit more uniform. And if we scroll around here, this is basically what we're looking at. And in order to see this bumpiness on the model a little bit better, I'm just going to go Materials, Default, Metallic Roughness, Tessellation and Displacement, and that'll bring up my parameters. And then I can push the scale of the model a little bit and increase the tessellation factor. And then we'll be able to actually see the detail that we're putting on this model. Cool. Now, obviously this doesn't look anything like rocks, and this is where we're going to start building in some structure. So what I'm going to do is, after this tile sampler, I'm going to hit Tab and I'm going to make myself a non-uniform directional warp grayscale. And I'm going to have the tile sampler plugged into the input, and I also want to plug it into the intensity input. And if I double click on this, there's a few parameters here that we want to change. So I'm going to drop the trail fade all the way down, and I'm going to pump the trail length all the way up. And you can sort of see here what that's doing. If I increase this trail length from 1 to say 5, it pushes all of those rock shapes over and creates this kind of interesting sort of extruded shape. But what you can see is that this node actually, what it does is it takes the sample image and it sort of duplicates it over and copies it and pastes it. And that creates all of these like little lines, and we don't really want those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the trail length to the point that those lines essentially disappear. So somewhere like this. So let's say 1.5. And they're mostly gone, which is fine. And then what we can do is we can just take this node and copy it and paste it a few times. Unfortunately, the node doesn't have the ability to increase the number of samples, but that's okay. We can just add a few of them and then we get the same thing coming through. Awesome. Okay, so that's starting to look a little bit like a sort of cliff rock face. I might actually put one more of these in here just to get a little bit more. Something like that. And that's a little bit much. So I'll grab this last one here and I'll grab the intensity from 10, drop it down to 5. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's cool. I think that's working. So if we grab our auto levels, that's looking not too bad. And what I might do is come back to my tile sampler now that we've got this shape sort of built out, and I am going to just play with the position random until I can get something that I'm a little bit happier with. Yeah, maybe something like that. Getting these kind of nice little areas, like we're getting these sorts of, these things here that are sort of close together. And then we're getting these like sort of larger, deeper areas here. That's kind of cool. That's not too bad. And if we come over here to our ambient occlusion, we can sort of see what that's doing. That's giving us these nice sort of dark areas in these gaps, which is cool. And I might even drop an auto levels after my ambient occlusion. What the auto levels basically does is it looks at the brightest and darkest pixel in your image, and then it readjusts the grade of that image so that the darkest pixel is fully black and the brightest pixel is fully white. And this will just help to sort of like maximize what our ambient occlusion image is actually doing here. So that's kind of cool. Alrighty, so we've got the overall sort of structure of our rocks here, but we kind of need some extra details here. So what we're sort of looking at is this very uniform pattern of shapes. So what I would probably do is, once we get here to this point, is I'd like to get some smaller rocks and sort of drop them into the lower parts of this image. So in these little valleys here, I think, you know, dropping them in here would be a good idea. All right, so in order to do that, I'm going to make myself another tile sampler. And this time I'm actually going to make an input shape. I'm going to grab a polygon node and I'm going to go polygon 2. And I'm going to grab myself a 5-sided polygon. If we made a 4-sided polygon, this was essentially the exact same shape that we're throwing into this tile sampler. But I'm just going to add an extra side to create a little bit of extra detail. And then I'm going to plug this shape into the pattern input of our tile sampler here. And in order to use that, I just come to the pattern here and go pattern input. That grabs me a bunch of these. And I'm going to scale these up, scale random, scale them up a little bit more, and then we will position random, and we'll do quite a bit of randomness to this, and we'll do a whole bunch of random rotation, because this is just going to be a bunch of little stones and rocks that are going to sit in some of these gaps. And the easy way to get them in those gaps, there's a bunch of things that you can do. The first thing I might do is just drag off this and try using a height blend. And for our height blend, we have a height bottom and a height top. So we actually want the bottom to come from these rocks and the top to be from these, and that'll prioritize the smaller ones in those gaps like we talked about. Something like that. And what we can actually do here is we can darken this image down so that they sit in those gaps a little bit better. So if I just grab a levels node, I can drag the high point down, and then in the height blend, that'll give me a little bit more headroom to bring these through in the areas where they should be. So that's one way that you can blend them through. The other way that you could blend them through is to grab yourself a blend node, make this the background and make this the foreground. And then you could use the max or lighten blend mode. And then you can adjust this levels to bring more of those rocks through in the areas that you want them. So that's another way that you can do this. So if we took this blend mode and popped it into the auto levels, we can sort of see what's going on there. It's kind of bringing through those rocks in those gaps. And let's try with the height blend. Yeah, we can sort of see what that's doing. So let's play around with our height offset. Yeah, like something like that. Sort of feels like it's working. And let's come back to our tile sampler. And let's just see what happens if we start messing with the scale a bit and we start pushing these rocks a little bit larger. Something like that. We could reduce the scale random a little bit to get some slightly more uniform shapes, which is kind of cool. And we could also adjust some of this also. We could push up the bottom end to bring more of them through, which might work as well. You know, that's kind of nice, like seeing what that's doing to our 3D shapes. That's quite cool. And now that we're sort of pushing some of those smaller rock structures through the larger rock structures, again, we can come back to our tile sampler here and, you know, we might be able to randomize some of these things just to see if we can find a better layout. So, you know, we could randomize the seed value, which is keeping all of the parameters the same, but just using a different randomness, you know, until you find something that you feel maybe works a little bit nicer for what we're doing. That's not too bad, actually. That feels kind of natural in terms of the sort of distribution and the structure. I might just delete this blend, pull this down, and we'll just do a final little tweak here. Yeah, something like that's really nice. And if we come in here close up, we can sort of see what's going on. If we reduce the contrast, we sort of get blending between the shapes, which we don't really want. The same with the opacity. Like we're getting, you know, we're sort of, that'll break up the smaller structure over the top of the large one, which we don't really want. So we want that to be, you know, fully opaque. Awesome. You know, so let's say, something like this is feeling like basically like what we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this whole structure here, drag this back, hit tab. I'm going to type frame, and I'm just going to frame this and then grab that and just call this rock structure. So obviously looking at this, we can see that this is all totally flat and straight, which, you know, it feels like more of a stylized rock. And that might be what you want, you know, like you could create super stylized rocks using this sort of workflow. But I'm kind of going to go for something a little bit more realistic because that's what we're sort of doing in our project. So looking at this here, there's a few things that we need. We need sort of cracks and striations across the surface of these rocks because that's sort of like what cliffs and rocks do. And then we also need to sort of like curve all of these straight lines and add some organic, you know, kind of break up to all of this stuff, I think, to make it a little bit more believable. So the curvature is probably something that I would do at the end, because as soon as you add like warping and curvature to things, it makes everything more complicated. So I'll leave that to the end, and I think the first thing we can focus on is just adding some striations and some like, you know, gouges to these rocks. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hold Alt and left click to make myself a little dot node, and then I'm going to drag off that, and I'm going to create the system for these striations. I'm going to type shadows, and this node's really cool. If we double click that, we don't see anything over here. That's just because the node doesn't produce super dark results. But if we grab this node and put an auto levels over the top of it, you can see what it's doing. It's treating the height map as if it was actually height, and then it's adding shadows into the faces that are on the opposite side to this direction here. So we can twist this light angle around and it'll add these shadows. So this is an important sort of first part of the process. So we go shadows and then we go auto levels. And then after this auto levels, I'm going to make a quantize grayscale node. And then you can see what that's doing. Quantize grayscale, it's basically taking these gradients on these sides of the rocks and then breaking them out into flat colors and drawing those lines in where the colors transition from one stop to another. And you can increase the number of steps using this slider here to get more. You can also use this offset here to push the values up. So that's sort of what we are going to use for the striations on the rock, but we also want them, we don't just want them on the bottom of these rocks here, we also want them on the top. So in order to do that, what we can do is we can grab this shadows here, we can copy and paste this, and then on this one, if we plug that one in, we can just flip the shadows around to the other side. And then we can just add these two images together. So if we blend the shadows, we'll take both auto levels, we'll make another one up here. 1 and 2, and then we'll drop both of these into the blend node. And in order to show the darkest colors from both sides of the blend, we can use the multiply blend mode, or you can also use the min darken, which essentially does exactly the same. There's a few small little differences in the way that it works, but you know, it's basically the same. I'm going to use the min darken, and then I'm going to plug that into the quantize, and that gives us this. Now, looking at this here, this is all sort of like, you know, very, very mathematically straight. And we don't really want that. We don't want like, you know, perfectly straight lines. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to come back to this rock structure here, and we're going to add like a tiny bit of distortion into this overall image here. So I'm going to hit Alt, click here, and I'm going to drag out here, and I'm going to make myself a vector warp grayscale. And this node is really cool. Basically what it allows you to do is take a 2D image and warp it in 2 dimensions based on an image channel input represented here by this vector map. So in order to make a vector map, we basically just have to construct a 2-channel image, feed it in, and those images represent the X and Y transforms that we're going to apply to the pixels in the image. So I'm going to just make a Perlin noise. And we're going to do, we'll do a fairly large Perlin noise, something like this. I'm going to copy this and paste it. And then I'm going to double click this second one and just change the random seed so that we have 2 different ones. And then off this guy, I'm going to make myself an RGBA merge. And we're going to have the Perlins plugged into both here. And I'm going to plug it in here, and this will completely blow up this image like this, right? But what we're going to do is just drag the intensity like way back down, something like this. Something very sort of subtle. And if we plug this back in here, you can sort of see what that's going to do to our rocks. I think we want even less than this. I think what we want is probably something like 0.005, something like that. And this will give us, you know, slightly broken up quantized information here. And the other thing that we can do to break this up even more is after this blended shadows, we can actually take another Perlin noise and we can drop it over the top of this. And this will curve all of the breakup of these shapes. So after this guy here, I'll go blend. I'll grab myself a Perlin noise. I'll plug this in over the top. I'll drag the opacity like all the way down so that we don't have hardly any, and then I'll drag it in here and we'll view the quantize, and then I'll go to this blend here and I'll just slowly increase this so we can sort of see what's happening. Yeah, you can kind of see how that's warping all of those striations and making them a little bit more rounded, which is nice. Sweet. Cool. And we can probably change the size of the purling noise as well, just to sort of play around and see what works best for us. Yeah, maybe something like that. That's probably going to work. Cool. Now, once we've done that, what we want to do is we want to convert that quantized grayscale image into cracks. And Substance Painter has a really cool node that we can use. If we go edge detect, this will basically find all of the edges where different colors are meeting one another, which is cool. So if I just drag the edge roundness down a little bit, we can also change the edge width somewhat. Kind of creates these like shapes, which is nice. Now, obviously, this is not very useful to just drop this on top of our image. But what we can do is we can take this edge detection here and we can bevel this and we get another image that's difficult to see. So I can just drop an auto levels on top so you can see it. You can sort of see what's happening here. It's beveling those shapes inwards and it's beveling those cracks as well. Now, if we drop this on top of our already existing rock pattern, it's not going to look very good straight away, but it will once we make some adjustments. So I'm just going to blend this over the top here. And I'm going to set the blending mode to multiply because we just want the darkness of those cracks to cut into the image underneath. And then if we take that over here, we can sort of see that, that's completely sort of, blowing everything up. So we don't want too much opacity. We probably want, something like that. And then what we're actually going to do to this beveled crack system here is we're going to add blotches of white over the top of it, which will thin out some of these cracks and make them sort of like really tiny, sort of like the cracks that you expect to see in the surfaces of rocks. So after this auto levels here, I'm going to go blend, and a perfect type of image to put over the top is just a purling noise. So if we drag that over the top here, and we'll set the blending mode to add, because we just want to add the white over the top, like this, and as we add that over the top, it'll start cutting those cracks away. So if we plug that back in here, and have a look at what happens to our image as we blend this purling noise over the top. Yeah, awesome. So we can see how those lines are turning into sort of like small little cracks that get plastered over the top of our rocks. But we are sort of eroding the tops of these rocks here because of our quantized grayscale. So I'm just going to turn off the offset here to pull those levels away from the top of our rocks a little bit. And then we still maintain the flat sort of edges of these guys, which is a little bit nicer. Cool. And let's just see if we add a little bit more of this to thin out some of those larger cracks. That's probably a little bit too much. I think it's probably okay the way that it is. Cool. So the other thing that we can do here before we blended these cracks over the rocks is we can break them up with some randomness, and then we can also adjust the way that the gradient of this image interpolates from black to white, because this is just sort of like perfectly mathematically straight, which is not very sort of organic, and it's not really helping us in terms of making it feel realistic. So if I select this node here, first thing I might do is add some noise to this and break it up. So again, like we did down here with our vector warp grayscale, I'm going to make another one of these. Vector warp grayscale, plug this in. And this time what I'm actually going to do is use a different type of breakup. I'm going to use I might use like a clouds one potentially. That might do something nice. So if I grab a couple of these, randomize the second one, and then plug this into an RGBA merge, red, green, and then plug this in here. And I'll drag the intensity all the way down so we get something like that. Yeah, so that sort of breaks up those striations a little bit, which is nice. And just for context, the reason why we randomized the second clouds node here is because we want the X and Y offsets to be different from one another. Alrighty, so now that we've done that, what I would probably do is give myself, first of all, a little bit more room to move here. I'm going to blend that new pattern that we just made over the top of the old one. And I will use the multiply. And I'm just going to actually, I'm not going to make it fully opaque. If I come here, I'm going to just add it in a little tiny bit. And you can kind of see what's coming through in the image here. We're getting these sort of interesting, like little, breakups here outside of our main sort of cracks, which is kind of nice. And I may even come back to my vector warp here and make this even less so that we don't have as much crazy breakup detail. Cool. All right. So that's giving us like, a little bit of randomness, something a little bit nice. And the last thing that I want to do here, like we talked about, is break up the way that this interpolates from black to white. And we can do that with a slope blur, and we can use like a clouds 2, drop that in there, and we'll put the samples on the slope blur all the way up, and we'll drag the intensity down. Something like this. And if we plug that in here, we get this nice kind of breakup on all of those shapes. And we need this to be like quite low. So we might go like 0.05. Yeah, nice. Might change my model from the rounded cube to the rounded cylinder just because it can be easier to sort of read the lighting a little bit better. Yeah. Nice. And I might also just adjust the roughness here. I might just push this up a little bit just to make it a little bit more rock-like so that it's easier to read. Nice. And these cracks here are these are quite straight along these rocks. So I'm going to come back to my my purlin noise that we blended over the top of our shadows. And I might just push this a little bit more just to break up those striations a little bit and just make them a little bit more sort of random. We can also, we could even take this whole image here and distort it as well, which is probably a good idea actually. So what I'll do is after we added this purlin noise, I might also grab myself a vector warp here, and then we'll do the same thing that we did before. We'll grab ourselves a fairly large purlin noise, something like this. We'll grab another one of those, we'll randomize it, we'll plug it into an RGBA merge node like we did before, and I'll actually change the scale of the second one so the pattern is a little bit offset and different. And then if we plug that in here, this will give us actually a little bit more meaningful breakup. So if we plug that in, come to a place like this where we can see all those shapes. And if we pull the intensity in a little bit, yeah, then we're getting just like a little bit more breakup on all those scratches, which is kind of nice. Alrighty. So what I'll do, like we did before, I'll just drag this over here, I'll drag these nodes over. I'm just going to grab this whole section here and just frame that and call that striations. And here at the end here, I think the next thing that we need to start doing here is looking at the overall surface of this rock and the overall breakup. So we talked about adding noise at the end, And I think that's probably what we should do here. So again, we're going to break this entire thing up. And this noise pattern that we used here to break up the shadows, I actually think I'd like to reuse this same noise pattern. So I'm going to drag off here and I'm going to make a dot node. And I'm going to call this shadow noise. And then I can come back over here, grab myself another dot node, and I can access that same pattern here. So if I click shadow noise, then I have access to this. And then I'll come here and I'll grab myself a vector warp grayscale, drag that in here, and we will just sort of push this around a tiny bit, drag that back here, and then it sort of uses the same breakup that we used for our rocks. That's not too bad. Not too bad. We might even be able to use a different breakup. We might want to go with something a little bit more extreme. So let's see if we can use a clouds instead. This might give us something a little bit more interesting. Maybe I'll just scale this up. Copy and paste that. Randomize the second one. And we'll do something like this. Now, when you drag something like this in, it'll completely explode because there's so much noise. But you can sort of see what I'm saying. It's giving you this like slightly better, sort of more rocky kind of pattern, you know? And what I might do is come over here and just use the ambient occlusion without the auto levels, just because it's darkening these rocks a little bit too much for me. Go to my cylinder to check this out. And I'm just going to sort of refine some of these material parameters here just so I can see what I'm doing a little bit better. I will actually drop the roughness a little bit, and then I'm going to add more normal intensity here. So rather than the intensity set to 1, let's just try setting this to like 3. Maybe a little bit more. We'll try 5. Yeah, and then what I might do is come back here to my vector warp, and I might just go 0.005, just so we're not destroying these shapes entirely. Just change this roughness a little bit. This can be helpful because, you know, when you're designing things, it can help if you're looking at something that is as realistic as possible. I find that it just helps me sort of make the right choices when I'm adding things and taking things away, etc. Yeah, nice. So like some of these shapes here are great. Like we're getting these awesome cracks and they're following the contours of the rocks nicely. So this is starting to move slightly away from the kind of stylized realm, and we're heading into sort of slightly more realistic territory, which is really, really cool. Nice. Alrighty. So now that we've done that, I think the last thing that I would probably do before we move on to our color and our metallic and our roughness breakup is I would add just an overall kind of microscopic detail and bumpiness to this whole image. And the way I'm actually going to do that is I'm just going to use a blend node. I'm going to do something ultra simple. And I'm going to grab myself a black and white spots. Maybe black and white spots 1. If we have a look at this, what does that look like? That gives us sort of like a bumpy... Yeah, so it's dark in some areas, it's light in others, so it's sort of like has a fair bit of variation. If we scale it up, play with the disorder. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of cool. So if we did something like this and we just added this here and we change the blend mode to subtract, this will cut away from our height map. So let's see how that looks. Now we need to be super careful with this. I might just do like 0.001. Maybe a little bit more. Let's try 0.01. It's too much. 0.005. Yeah, something like that's kind of cool. But it's a little bit homogeneous. It's sort of the same everywhere. So I think like probably what I would do is take this and break this up with another clouds node. We'll try like clouds 3. What does that look like? It's not really granular enough. I'll try clouds 2. And I'll add scale to this and just make it fairly large. And then I'll take this black and white spots and I'll multiply it with the clouds node. Yeah, that's going to give us just a little bit more nice breakup. It'll just kind of like break up that pattern a little bit. Give us some slightly more interesting surface detail. And then what I'll do here is I might just add a little bit more of this. I might go 0.0075. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of cool. That's not too bad. Now, from here, there's lots of stuff that we could keep doing. You know, like we could spend 10 times as much time on this to make something super, super polished and realistic. But I think I've shown sort of like enough of the basics here for everyone to sort of get started and start understanding how you can do stuff like this. So from here, I think what I actually might do is move on to the color. And the color is actually going to be fairly straightforward. So I'll move these over here, grab my color over here. And what I'm actually going to do is after the end of my node graph here, I'm going to take the auto levels here and I'm going to make a dot node and I'm going to call this final height. And then I'm going to take the ambok and I'm going to extract that and call that ambok. And then from there, we're going to use these two images in combination with a few other things to produce our color. So if we come up here to our color image, I'm going to grab a dot node and I'm going to grab the final height, select that, and I'm going to attach that to a gradient map. And the gradient map is essentially a way of taking a black and white image and mapping a color spectrum onto it. So to show you how this works, if I grab the gradient editor here and I click up here on the gradient, you know, if I made the black red and I made the white, you know, blue, you can kind of see what it's doing. It's sort of interpolating between those colors. But what I actually want to do is I want to pick a gradient from an external source. And I've got this kind of rock texture over here that is going to be really nice to use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go pick gradient and then I'm just going to click and drag over this image to grab a whole bunch of colors. And straight away, you can kind of see here that that looks terrible, right? Because this height image here, we have a lot of like linear interpolation between black to white or, you know, low to high. And then we're just mapping those values on inside this gradient map. But what we can do in order to make this usable is we can actually take an image and inject it here over the top of the height to break it up. And then we'll get like a much nicer result in this gradient map, whilst still sort of retaining some of the overall structure of our height detail underneath. So if I just grab a blend here, and I might grab something like a black and white spots 3. Let's have a look. That might work. I'll just drag this back over so I've got a little bit of extra room. Let's make this a little bit scaled so that we have lots of detail, and then we'll blend this over the top. And what I'll use is the overlay mode. Overlay, something like that. And we'll drag this back and then we'll plug this back in here and we'll double click the gradient map to check that out. And then we'll come to the blend mode and we'll just add these spots in. And you can kind of see what happens to the breakup of our color channel as we do that. Now that's not quite enough breakup in my opinion. Like we're still getting like too much sort of structure in these shapes here. So maybe instead of using overlay, I might just use the copy mode and I'll start dragging this down until we get enough of that rock structure coming through that we can sort of see what we're doing, but we're getting enough breakup that it sort of seems believable. So that's kind of cool. Like we're getting these kind of like really nice rocky shapes here. So let's just plug this straight into our base color and see how that looks. So yeah, so like looking at that, it's kind of cool, but I think we can do a better job by grabbing a different gradient. So what I might do is just come back to my, my rock image here, grab my gradient map and just pick gradient again. And I'll just drag around the image until we come up with something that looks like, you know, relatively believable. And you can get like really different results with, you know, different gradients, which is cool. You know, we could just keep selecting different ones until we can come up with something that feels reasonable. It's kind of cool. That's kind of cool too. We're getting this nice sort of breakup. Let's come back to our blend here, and yeah, so the less we blend in, the more rock structure we get. The more we blend it in, the less rock structure we get. So we kind of want like a nice sort of middle ground. And then I think the other thing that I want to do is reduce the contrast on this. So if I grab myself a levels node, I can just sort of, you know, reduce this contrast so we don't have as much gap between the bright and the dark. And that kind of works nicely for us. We get this sort of, we get this kind of nice result where we have like light colors on the top of the rocks. And you know what I might do as well is before we run this into the gradient map, I might use, I might grab the ambok result and just add that in over the top of this just slightly to give this gradient just a little bit more structure. So we'll use the multiply. This is the rock pattern, and then this will add this in over the top. All right, so let's just drop this in here, and then let's pay attention to what's happening in the 3D view as we multiply this ambok in. And we're just going to be very subtle about this. So this is 0.18, this is 0. So I think, yeah, something like 0.13, yeah, like that's kind of working. I like that. I like the structure. And I think I'm actually going to swap the order in which these go. So I'm going to plug this one in here first, and then I'm going to plug this one in here second. So that's our height. That's our ambok, and then this is our breakup. And then I can just add a little bit more of that breakup. So that's really nice. I'm happy with that. We could keep playing with this for hours, but you kind of get the idea of what we're doing here. Nice. Alrighty. Now the last thing, another thing that I'd probably like to do here is just make this a little bit darker overall. Maybe I'll just pull the bottom end down a bit. So we're making this whole thing slightly darker. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to drop the highlights of the ambient occlusion here. I want to drop this over the top of everything. If we select this, we have these really nice sort of bright white highlights on the tops of the rocks where we have these kind of like streaky angles. And I'm going to grab this and just add this over the top. So what I'm going to do here in order to extract this is I'm going to grab a histogram scan. And the histogram scan allows us to select a portion of the black and white image based on its value. So I'll add a little bit of contrast here. And then what I'll do is I'll break this up just a little bit. I'll use a clouds 3 and I'll come here and I will multiply this over the top. And I don't want to use too much of it, just a little bit. And then what I'm also going to do, I'll just grab all this and move this up so I've got a little bit more room, is with this clouds 3, I'm just going to make a levels node, and I'm just going to crunch up the color a bit. Just to add a little bit of contrast, like this. Just so that we don't want to be subtle with this. We want to break this up in quite an obvious sort of way. Yeah, like something like that. That's cool. So with that done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and grab myself a gradient map to convert this into color information, because we can't add a grayscale over the top of our color information here. So I'll make a blend here. So you can see if we drop this over, this works, but this would not work. So this turns it into color, then we can add it over the top. And we're just going to use the add linear dodge mode to add these values over. And I'm going to change the opacity. I'll drag this like all the way down. I'll pop this up here. And then we'll come in here and we'll just kind of add this in until this feels like it should. Yeah, something like that. That feels nice. Feels pretty good. And then the last thing I might do with these rocks is grab our ambok and just multiply this over the entire color channel, just to give it some extra darkness. Again, we have to gradient map this like this. And then we can just multiply this in. So that's this is our base color. And then this is with the ambok multiplied in. So I'm not going to go too overboard with this. I might just do something like this, drag this in. And then we're getting this really nice kind of stylized result. We're still a little bit too shiny on these rocks. So I'm going to come and grab my roughness and turn this up slightly. A little bit more. Cool. And then the last thing I would probably do is use these values here from our color channel that we created with our gradient map, this guy here, and feed some of that back into our roughness map. Because, you know, we want these sort of rocky structures to feel like they have slightly different roughnesses. So from this gradient map, I'm going to make myself a dot node, and I'll call this rock surface. And then down here on our roughness, I'm going to grab myself a dot node, and I'll go rock surface, and we'll add a blend here. And we need to convert this color back into grayscale. So to do that, we just drag off here and we go grayscale conversion. And then we can just pop that in there like that, which makes it black and white. And I'll just drag this opacity sort of down like something like this so that it's not super obvious. So that was before. That's with the roughness added in. And if we add it completely in, you'll sort of see what it's doing. You'll get like ultra shiny bits of rock and then, you know, ultra rough pieces. So we don't really want anything that extreme. We want something, you know, subtle like this, but you can kind of see what's happening here. You're getting like little bits of shiny rock sort of poking through different parts. It's sort of subtle, but it is kind of important. Nice. And let's check that out in the iRay renderer. I'm going to maximize the viewport here. Very cool. Nice. So I'll grab all of this. I'll frame that. I'll call that my color. And then everything else is down here. We have the roughness, we have the metallic. And what I would do before I send all of this over to Unreal Engine is I would export this roughness to a dot node and call this rough final. and I would call this metallic final. Not that we have anything in our metallic, but you could, if you wanted to have little bits of, little shards of metallic rock in there, you could. And I will call this the end of my... Actually, I don't need to name that because that can just be a map that we export as color. And then we have occlusion, roughness, metallic. And the reason why I'm making these little nodes here is we're going to combine all of these into a single output. So I'm going to make myself 3 dot nodes. The first one is our occlusion, so I'm going to grab the ambok. The second one is the roughness, so rough final, and metallic final. And then we would just combine these into an RGBA merge. And then this is a single channel image that you can export to Unreal Engine for your occlusion, roughness, metallic, because those 3 maps are essentially just black and white images. They don't contain any sort of like vector color data. And that's essentially it. So, this is now like a fully made rock. It's fully tileable, and you can take it straight over to Unreal Engine just by exporting your base color map here. You can just, come and grab this and go save, and then you can just export that somewhere. Same with your occlusion, roughness, metallic. You can send that over to Unreal as a single image, and then you can send over your normal map as well, and then you've basically got everything that you need. And just before I wrap this up, I'm going to grab my auto levels here. I'm going to come to my 2D viewport and hit the spacebar just to double check that this is fully repeating, and it is, which is great. And that's essentially job done. Cool. So yeah, hopefully you guys found this useful. If you like the tutorial, feel free to comment. We always appreciate, like and subscribes. And as always, if you have an interest in arena shooters or indie game dev or how to make multiplayer video games, feel free to come and join our Discord channel where we talk about the development of the game, we share ideas, we plan game tests. It's a fun little community and it's steadily growing, which is great. So yeah, thanks again, and we will see you soon.